really excited to be sharing with you today. And thank you so much, all three of you, for joining us at Forever Fest. And nice to see your face in person, Alice. We've been seeing lots of your epic videos, so thanks for putting those together.
Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Likewise.
Well,
hello.
Hello. Looking forward to join the panel.
And yeah, I mean, whenever's good, whoever'd like to introduce all of the work you're up to. I know you know everything better than an outsider's perspective, so I'd love to just host over to you and maybe introduce your part in all of making the foundation role and affecting indeed the Pacific area especially. So whoever would like to introduce, I'm ready to just jump in when needed and listen to all your magic.
Great. So it was really interesting. Hi, I'm Ricki. It was really interesting hearing Alana talk just now about the nappy issue, because it's an enormous problem, obviously, with what we're doing with Plastic Oceans, as you mentioned, Barney. So yeah, it's something that goes into the mix of the amount of garbage that gets dumped into the ocean unintentionally through landfill, but sometimes intentionally as well. So I first of all just wanted to say a big thank you to the City of Greater Dandenong for inviting us for Plastic Oceans to be here today. I really appreciate us being part of the Forever Fest. Even in Melbourne going into lockdown 4, and you know, all of us Melbourneians being at home again on a weekend when we were looking forward to being out and about. So we're kind of used to it. Gavin's in Melbourne as well. So but if nothing else, it shows how we're resilient and strong, and we keep doing what we do. And hopefully we'll be out of lockdown in a few days, and it'll open up the borders. And Alice, you scurried off to WA, so you got out of the East Coast. So good on you. Anyway, so I wanted to just do a little intro about, you know, who we are, why we're here. Why is Plastic Oceans relevant, and you know why I believe that we were asked to chat today to the residents of the City of Dandenong, and basically our foundation is an environmental NGO, and we actually started here in Australia to represent Australasia on the back of the film that most of you will have heard of, particularly Alice, I'm sure you will have. The movie that was the feature-length movie that was launched at the end of 2016 called A Plastic Ocean, and that film was the first movie that really created global attention and awareness to what's going on in the oceans with the amount of waste, particularly plastic. So that movie really resonated, and it's still being shown today to over 120 countries, and even 4 years later, and even with all the other movies that have come out since then, because it really started the war on waste, is Drowning in Plastic, The Story of Plastic, and even David Attenborough, who's a supporting man in that movie, it sort of tipped him to do Blue Planet 2. So it's just really finally raised the awareness, probably 4 decades too late, in my opinion, because I've been living with plastic my whole life, and as in my father had the first plastic recycling plant here in Victoria. So I really know, as a young girl in the back sorting plastic, the scourge of plastic, and how we haven't actually moved very quickly as human beings. We've been very, very slow to take up the charge of realizing that plastic is completely indestructible. And even though we have got some wonderful things out there with biodegradable and combustible, compostable plastic items, it's still a huge issue. And by the time some of those break down, if they are treated the right way, they don't always necessarily end up where they should be. In any case, they can still get in the water and still suffocate a turtle or do some damage to something before they actually break down, or as we always say, break up. So Plastic Oceans Australasia, we're based here in Melbourne, as mentioned, and we're very close actually to the City of Dandenong. We work really, really closely to change people's behaviour, and our mission is to change the way people you know, their attitude, how they act, how they respond to plastic, particularly single-use plastic. We really focus on that space, and how can people make a difference in their daily life. So like was said before, if every day just one person if one person stopped using the disposable nappies and went to cloth nappies, the difference is amazing. So we have a behaviour change program, which is a very, very big education program that we run through schools, community groups. We do a lot in business sustainability, and everything that we do is underpinned by science and research. So our movie is one of our resources that we still use, and there's shorter versions and other movies and other resources that we have. And we try every day just to change people's behaviour, get them thinking about what they can do and how they can do it differently. So we hope that by speaking to the audience today, that if there's somebody that wants to do something differently, we can help them find alternatives. We can encourage them and share with them how not just what they can look at physically with reducing the waste, for example, in their garbage, in their curbside bins. Physically, they can see the difference, but we also want people to change how they think long term. So that's really who we are, what we are. And if there was only one thing that I could, speaking of that, if there's only one thing I could get people to think about today, if I could encourage, particularly in Melbourne, everybody to stop using their disposable masks, if everybody could stop using disposable masks and use reusable masks, the cloth masks, and wash their masks, we would be helping enormously with the damage that's happening out there. Because at the moment, there's every minute of the day, even while I've just been speaking, every minute we throw away 3 million face masks. And many of those, of course, end up in, they're toxins, they don't break down. It will break up over 450 years. So if there's only one thing people could do today is to not use a mask that's a disposable mask, that would be amazing. So that's I'm very passionate about trying to get that message out there, because there's so many mixed fibres, and a lot of people don't even realise that this is plastic. They think it's cloth and that there's no danger. And even these little hooks here are a huge danger to marine life as well. So happy to talk about that later. But anyway, over to Gavin, who I'd like to introduce our schools program. Gavin's going to explain why he's here and the very strong connection. Over to you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Ricki. So yeah, essentially coming out of Plastic Oceans, one of our main goals as a part of Plastic Oceans is about education. So basically telling the general public our visions, what we are about, and why such plastic wastes are so important, and what the individual steps every single person can do to reduce their plastic footprint. Oh, I see some reflections off of my face. That should be better now. So essentially myself, I'm currently a first-year university student, and my connections with Plastic Oceans actually happened when I was still in year 10 of my high school years. And essentially our school was the first ambassador school, we call that, in Plastic Oceans. And essentially what that is Plastic Oceans brings in their resources and their expertise to a local school, which was our school. And they give us the different methodologies, expertise, and techniques we can implement ourselves to both reduce our plastic footprint and to even expand into other schools to continue this wave of the wave in reducing our plastic influence, our plastic footprints, and our contamination. So again, just echoing on what Ricki has said, I've prepared something, a virtual background. If you're wearing one of these masks, please don't. Instead, use a reusable cloth mask. That is basically it. These things are indeed plastic. People claim they take 450 years to break up, but the truth is, even when they break up, they don't just disappear into the environment. Every single piece of plastic that's been created is still here with us today. They just break down into microplastics, which can cause a whole new world of plastic problems on their own. So I think now the issue sort of comes down to, we know all of these things. We know plastics is bad, right? We know that if you buy like a $2 water bottle that you use once and you throw it into a landfill, that's bad. But how can we convey that information to our general population? How can we convey that information so everyone takes it into account? Everyone keeps that to mind, because You can have a million scientific theory, which as an engineering student myself, I'm very keen on discovering, but you can have a million scientific theory, you can have a million different proofs, but there's no use for those proofs. You're just going to keep them to yourself. So keep them to a very niche and expert and a very niche community. A really important part of our job is to convey that information to people, to the general population, so they can implement those changes and those behavioral impacts on their own, that they can improve. So what an important part of Plastic Oceans, as I mentioned, is to reach out into different schools, different primary schools, secondary schools all across Australia, all across the Australasia region. And what we do is we go to those schools, we get the students involved, we get the students, the teachers there involved in what the different things they can do in their own schools. For example, conduct a plastic audit and see if people know what items to be placed into the recycling bin, what to be put into a landfill, and to reduce the usage of single-use plastics into their own, say, their lunch boxes, their canteens, to reduce the usage of single-use plastics there. So that is a whole range of activities that we do to bring the educational level into the people, into the young minds who are still growing. Because I mean, if you're learning something in school, it is really important for you to learn these things, that you can start implementing the scientific behavioral changes behind them. And what we really love seeing is that when these students learn the different things they need to do to reduce their footprint, they actually talk to their parents, their friends as well, and that sort of implements, and that starts off a whole new wave on our journey towards the elimination of single-use plastics. So that should be everything from me. Alice, I'll pass the ball on to you.
All right, thanks so much, Gavin. So that's kind of perfect, because what I have to say really echoes a lot of what you just said. I'm going to pop up a couple of slides to run through. So my background really is in science. However, after working as a researcher for a long time, I really came to see how much there was a gap between that science and that research and the general public and behavior. So basically, this is the message I want everyone to take home from today. I think a big part of what's happening now in the plastic pollution area is that we all really know about the problem, and it often can be overwhelming because we see so many images of turtles tangled in plastic bags, or you hear about all the millions of pieces of microplastic flushing out, and it can be really hard to feel like we can make a difference. So what I really want everyone to take home today is just embodying this message that we don't need perfect people. We just need everyone to do what they can to start making a difference. So a little bit about myself, just a couple of minutes here. So my background is in marine biology, studying plastic. So this shot of me on a beach is from the most plastic polluted island in the world, Henderson Island. So I was part of the team that discovered and documented this island. So I was there studying seabirds actually, and then we stumbled across this horribly polluted beach. And then while there, I started my own research looking at plastic inside commonly eaten fish. So that's what you can see on the other side of those images, a very glamorous picture of me with some fish intestines, and you can see the microplastic in those. So I spent many years working as a scientist and trying to learn more about the plastic pollution problem. But ultimately, I realized that the gap there was in communication and in education, because we've known about this problem for so long, and yet we keep increasing the amount of plastic, particularly single-use plastic, that we produce. So that's when I got more into this communication space. So I've made a couple of free books, which you can see here, which are available to download. Here's a couple of pictures from the books. So I've been trying to work more in this space of getting the information out there, because I feel like that information is really empowering if done in the right way, and is the first step in making a difference. So my kind of attitude is education, which is why organizations like Plastic Ocean are so important, because first of all, we need that information. We need to know what's going on. But then I think the next step really needs to be creating that world that we want to live in. So since starting as a scientist, I've now moved into being a wildlife guide, and I work all over the world. One amazing thing about this is that I get to see some incredible places. One not so great side is that everywhere I go, we do see those impacts of plastic pollution. Even Antarctica, probably the most remote place on Earth, is impacted by plastic. So that's why I've come here today with this message, that I think it's really important that we all be part of this solution. And ultimately, even though cleanups are extremely important, particularly as part of education, what we all really need to do is be part of turning off that tap and stopping plastic pollution at the source. And that's the biggest thing all of us can do. What this comes down to is definitely personal changes. So if all of us make those little changes, stopping using those face masks, switching to reusable nappies, getting those reusable bottles and cups and bags. You've all heard the messaging before, so you all know how important all these little switches are. But I think it's also important to remember that ultimately, even though we can be part of the solution, we shouldn't feel that guilt and that responsibility, because ultimately it is those companies that are producing the products that really need to take control, and the governments that are allowing this to happen. So it's those bigger changes that we need to push for. So by doing those individual changes, it's hugely important, and you never know how that will ripple out and inspire other people. But it's also important that we focus on those bigger changes and creating a more sustainable world. So that's things like better legislation, more sustainable businesses, and moving towards that circular model where we're not just designing things to be thrown away. So that's the message I've come in here with today. I think we can all be part of the solution, and I hope to empower everyone to do that. I don't want to empower people, or I don't want people to leave this feeling guilty and like they got a takeaway coffee and now they've killed a turtle. My messaging is more, I hope that everyone tries to do what they can in their own life, but doesn't take on that guilt of the hugeness of the plastic pollution problem, and looks at that bigger picture. And hopefully we can all be part of that, creating that better world together and creating a world in the future that isn't so dependent on single-use plastics. And I'm really hopeful and positive that can happen, because if we look at the history, it's only really been a generation that we've had this huge dependence on throwaway items. So I'm really confident, and looking at what's happening, it's all snowballing. So within a generation, I'm hopeful we can swing back the other way, where we reuse things, we repair things, and we don't have this throwaway culture. So there's my quick little intro. And I think I'll probably hand back over to Barney now. And I think we've got probably some questions from the crowd to chat about.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for your energy, Alice, and appreciate your ethos. You know, if we all do a lot gets done, and especially just cleaning up little bits and bobs when we're not just on beaches, but waterways and parks, and even on streets. You know, it's all of our obligation to do it safely. And like you said, you do something, and then two people see it, and then they'll maybe consider doing it, and there really is that halo effect. And you know, you mentioned working with the schools, and I really like the plastic audit. I did Plastic Free July last July, and you know, I only had a handful of stuff, but I tried my best, and yet I still had stuff like a couple of e-commerce things, a couple of vegetarian sausage packets, and a big tub of Nutella X. And it's like, how do we, again, not have the kind of guilt trip, but how do we show people that the kind of $1 stores and going to Woolies and buying everything in plastic instead of trying to look for the different product, and especially Woolworths, because the cups and the reusable bottles, and that's one part of it. But for most people, you go to Woolies, you will come out of there with a handful of plastic items. And I understand that we need to put that pressure on the top, and we can go to bulk food stores, and we can use things like Zero Co, who have the recycled laundry products, and all of those things are awesome. But for the average person in the city of Dandenong, or who's working paycheck to paycheck and in that hustle, you know, how can we make this stuff a bit more appealing? And I know you've done fun things like the treasure hunt, and you get some clothes in return of every bits of 10 bits of rubbish equals a token, and we can gamify it. But how do we break the bubble per se, and not be preaching to the choir, but be preaching to the people who this isn't really on their radar? Do you know any advice for kind of penetrating that side of the market in a way?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think after working in this field for so long, that's really what it's come down to. I think at the start for me, it was got to get rid of all the plastic in my life. And then it gets to the point where it just becomes so overwhelming, and you keep learning more, and you keep seeing the plastic, and you realize that as important as individual change is, ultimately the solution needs to be bigger than that. So that's why I think definitely different initiatives are important, like that seaside scavenge that you mentioned. I'd encourage everyone to have a look at that. They're all around Australia. I can put a link to it in the chat later. And the seaside scavenge is a fun way to get people cleaning up, swapping the beach trash for secondhand clothes, but also just starting the conversation with different types of people, which I think is what it comes down to, because we can often get caught in just talking to the same groups of people that already have all of the reusable items, and it feels like then you don't get anywhere. But I think in order to get those bigger changes, what we need to do is put more pressure on for legislation. We need more pressure on our local council, state and federal government. And we really need people to put that pressure on business, because I think the businesses really benefit from us feeling like it is our problem and our fault every time we use a plastic item. I don't know if you get those ads on your Spotify, which I've gotten recently, of about a guy going to a gym and he gets a plastic bottle that's made of recycled plastic so he doesn't have to feel guilty. And I think for me, that sums up exactly what the issue is. The plastic companies make a lot of money by selling us single-use plastic. And so they benefit by us feeling like it's our fault and our problem. So to kind of take the power back, we need to say to the companies that's not okay. And that starts with not buying their products and not supporting single-use plastic. But at the end of the day, not everyone has that luxury, I guess. It's a real privilege to be able to say, I can afford to go to the farmer's market and the bulk food shop, and not everyone has that access. So that's why it's also up to us who do have that privilege to really put the pressure on to get those bigger changes.
And any thoughts on sort of things like zero waste bans, like Queensland just done the single-use ban and kind of encouraging schools to go zero polystyrene. And a lot of those things are kind of, you take away in a sense, like meatless Mondays, for example. I don't think it's the best strategy because people feel like, wait, I'm not having something, instead of being like new recipe Tuesday. And similar with polystyrene bans and single-use bans, is there something that's kind of that people get something? And I really like the scavenger hunt for that, because it's not a one-way thing that you're just taking rubbish, you get something in return. So have you seen a way that we can kind of make people feel like they're having a reciprocity for their engagement outside of just altruism, which is obviously good for some, but others need that different kind of prod?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting there's kind of two sides to this. So one, there's like the 10-cent refund on bottles and cans, which can be viewed as a bottle tax if you are in the plastics industry and you want it to look bad, or 10 cents back for your bottle and can if you want it to look more positive. So I think it's also worth like seeing through that spin, because often really good initiatives are painted as bad by those industries that keep benefiting from us consuming single use. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I think at the end of the day, it has to be about giving people easy, positive solutions and not saying what you're doing is wrong and so you deserve to be punished. So I think that's why things like the Seaside Scavenge work really well, and other community initiatives. So I'm a big fan of that, like boomerang bags, for example, where they provide a cloth bag that has been sewn by volunteers from donated reusable fabric, and people can just borrow it to take their groceries home. And it's not about guilting or shaming anyone. It's being like, cool, here's a really fun fabric bag that you can take and use that your community has made that's going to save you from using a plastic bag. So I think, and there's so many initiatives like that all around the world, often that we don't even hear about. And that's what really gives me hope. So those little things that are giving people more positive, optimistic, easy options that aren't making them feel bad about themselves or feel like they're part of a big problem.
And Gavin, have you seen much, could you maybe list a couple more examples and initiatives you're seeing that work well with the students and kind of getting them fired up?
Yeah. I think in terms of the actual school activities, what the students really like to see is sort of like two aspects. On one aspect is what they can implement themselves and what they can talk and get their people, get their peers, get their parents engaged on. And then there's also the second pillar, which is sort of what they are seeing the company, I guess the companies, the industrial, like sort of like a institutionalized change on fighting alternatives. Because what the students really want to see is not to sort of like, in a sense, if you, as a student myself, it is sort of difficult for the entire community to significantly change their behavior to adapt to a new world where they're completely different from what they're used to. But instead, what people want to do is to, while not significantly altering their daily routines, to reduce their footprint, because most people are still keen on taking these steps to improve their sustainability levels, while not like, as long as that doesn't significantly impact or alter what they have been used to. So for example, for the first pillar is that what the students really like doing is to reduce the amount of single-use plastics they bring to lunches. Their lunches, their school bags, for example, when people used to buy things, they tend to put their documents into little plastic pockets. So instead, we're like, okay, please don't do that. Well, the plastic pockets, first of all, they're made out of fossil fuels, they're made out of petroleum. And if you're doing that, well, you're not really doing yourself any goods for the environment. If you're just putting like a single sheet of paper into a plastic pocket individually, use it once to submit in an assignment and you throw it away, that's not really good. That's like even worse than single-use plastics, because the actual bags themselves, they cannot be recycled at all, nor is it made out of those compostable, which is still questionable. But if anyone has questions with regards to compostable plastics, they can feel free to ask in the chat or later. But it's just about, say, for example, rather than using single-use plastic pockets, What they can instead do is to buy a binder book and then just bind everything into those 2D ring binders. Those things hold like 500 to 600 pages, and if you need to submit something, just submit like the paper. Like, it's not like you're putting them into space, right? It's not going to be subjected to so much abuse, and you need to protect it in a special heavy duty plastic pocket. Just submit it bare. So in a sense, it's about making these small but still definitely noticeable behavioral changes into the students' daily lives that they can notice themselves, and they get a sense of fulfillment after doing so. And it's about the school also encouraging those things to be implemented. And then we also have the second pillar, which is the students really like seeing and we're hearing stories on either a scientific level or on a big industrial level that they're like, oh, wow, that's so cool, so to speaking. So one of the things that we really like to talk about is in the fields of industrial and environmental engineering. So when we, for example, we're doing designing the water distribution networks for big cities, what we used to do is we used to use PVC piping, polyvinyl chloride, for after the ozone disinfection process for our city's water distribution networks. The reason for that is PVC pipes they're basically incredible if you exclude their environmental hazards. Like, they have a really small absolute roughness on the walls. They make the water flow really nice and laminar. But the issue with that is the polyvinyl chloride pollutes the environment like there's no tomorrow. They are made out of fossil fuels. They can actually harm the soil they're buried next to. So what we encourage the industry to do on an academic level is, rather than using polyvinyl chloride, we use 303 stainless steel. They have a significantly lower environmental footprint. Being stainless steel, they can just be combined into our global steel and metal production process. They actually last significantly longer than PVC. They're a lot more environmentally and physically resistant because stainless steel is a lot stronger than PVC piping. But the main issue before is that those pipes are really expensive to produce compared to PVC. So right now, adding on to what Alice said about the legislative and the governmental changes, what is really important about that is we need to encourage the industry to take on these alternatives, which they may be a little bit expensive, but through legislative changes and encouragements, that's where we can really get the change and the wave happening onto the new level of sustainability. And that's what the students really like to hear as well in school, something cool, something bold that they like to see that's actually being implemented. Hope that answers your question.
Definitely, and I couldn't agree more with making it tangible. There's too much going on in the old, boxes these days, and I think if we can connect people with their senses to impact, it's really important. And I'd love to get your perspective on biodegradable versus compostable, because my understanding is biodegradable is no bueno because you need to put it through an incinerator effectively to heat it to then have it ready to go into pellets or something else to disappear basically. But from my understanding, compostable is where the future is that either it lasts for a couple of months or you put water in it or sunlight and then it literally just turns into compost, whether it's on scale or you just throw it into your garden. So maybe kind of making that clear separation, and for anyone who doesn't know, kind of what do we look for as consumers to make sure that we're not just going with a biopack or not necessarily that brand, but you know what I'm saying, that we don't encourage just a plastic labeled in a different sense and something that truly is organic. And if it does end up on the street or we put it in our garden, it doesn't have that chemical hydrocarbon component to it. Biodegradable stuff does, but it has some similar problems, especially with stuff just still lasting for a long time. So anything between the two would be really welcome.
So yeah, definitely. So in a sense, the best way for people to sort of reduce their plastic footprint is to not determine if something is compostable or biodegradable, just avoid them altogether. So in a sense, if you are wanting to buy something, then if you don't use a packaging, like if you just grab your food bare, grab your milk in like a paper carton, and it's infinitely better than any form of plastic, regardless if they're compostable or biodegradable. So the main issue with, say, such biodegradability or compostability is that on an industrial scale, it still requires an enormous amount of resources to process these things, for example, if you are trying to recycle a 1 ton of plastic, you almost will need 1 ton of equivalent amounts of diesel to generate that electricity that you need to turn that plastic into a form that can be reused again. So on a resource level, it is actually significantly resource demanding and resource intensive if you want to transform something, even if they're being advertised as, say, compostable or biodegradable, because on an industrial scale, because not everyone is going to have like an incinerator in their backyard, but even if you do, it still requires a significant amount of resources to do. So what our advice would be for everyone listening here is that rather than trying to hunt down, oh, this plastic bag is biodegradable, it's compostable, it is much better to just avoid using these bags altogether and instead just bring like a reusable bag, bring like a cloth bag that you take to every single supermarket visit, that you take to everywhere, that you sort of wash and then you reuse. So it's sort of like with regards to that model of reduce, reuse, recycle. You want to reduce first, and then when you can't reduce something, you reuse it. And if you absolutely can't reuse it, then that's when you move on to the recycling step. That sort of makes sense.
But just pushing back on that, Gavin, you know, the reality is there's billions of people who do need to be fed, and you know, cities like Singapore, they've got well over 50% of stuff coming in from either Malaysia or around the world. And with the reality of e-commerce and the reality of international trade, we do need substitutes. There's no ifs or buts. People, especially with COVID right now, are crazy about if there's contamination. You send some almonds from California to Australia and they do have contaminants, you know, they lose their supply chain credibility and they don't run as a product anymore. And so not to rip the carpet out from global trade, which I think is sometimes what we feel like doing when we're frustrated, isn't there a space to be transitioning to especially compostable, or, you know, what IKEA has done recently, they completely phased out polystyrene and switched it with a compostable mushroom packaging. And whether it's Samsung giving TVs to the world or electric vehicles being transported around the world, we still do need to address packaging. And I think there needs to be more emphasis put on the big polluters, that if you're Amazon or you're Coca-Cola, you need to be cleaning up more plastic than you're producing. And there needs to be almost a plastic tax, a waste tax, in my opinion, for some of these bigger polluters. But how can we transition? Because it's a reality. You go to Woolies this afternoon, there's still a lot of virgin plastic, hydrocarbon base, and just curious on how we can transition and be aware that right now with COVID especially, everyone's gone crazy. And as we heard from, you know, before, the masks are again a huge thing. But I think, Alice, you have any thoughts on this?
Can I just jump in? Oh, sorry. I was just gonna jump in to carry on with what Gavin was saying, because one of the things that we work really hard about is getting the manufacturers to look at, and Germany is a real lead in this with the extended producer responsibility. And it's very much about transitioning, as you were saying, you were asking the question, Barney, about transitioning over to alternative products. And one of the things that we've been doing with our business side of Plastic Oceans is we work with a lot of businesses, corporates, government entities, councils in particular. We actually do a whole engagement program where instead of saying you shouldn't be using plastic, but if you can reduce your plastic, we've actually got a list of products you can use, which are alternatives. So you can transition over, which is exactly what is needed. So we have a plastic swap app that is still not a lot of people know about. And it's basically focusing on offering people, where do I go to find, if I want to replace this for something else, what can I use? Because people are short on time, as you said, you know, you go to the supermarket, you want to grab everything quickly, get the stuff in the trolley, get home, make your food, etc. And then the next thing is we just chuck it away. So we've been working really hard in that whole space of the behaviour change, of giving people alternatives. But it is also very much about the manufacturers looking at and focusing on driving change to actually look at the end of use of the end of use of the treatment of that actual product, and how they can either look at what they're going to do. They pay for that, which puts the price up, puts more value commercially. And there's a lot of commercialization in the value of plastic. And, Alice mentioned before about the circular economy. We talk about, circular economy, the supply chain, extended use of responsibility, but it does all come back to policy, and it does all come back to what's driving change. So I see it as three things. It's the government from the top, it's the businesses, and then it's the community from the bottom up. And it's basically that sandwich effect. So it's something that really needs everybody to be involved. And I don't think that people feel guilty as much anymore, because there are alternatives out there. And I think that's what's great, obviously, about the book that Alice has written. And we'd be really happy to include that with our listing of all the things that we're doing out there. So we're trying to give people options that make it easy for them to go and find alternatives without it being this big maze, because it's very, very difficult to actually know where to switch to and what to do. So I just wanted to jump in to say that, because we've got a whole big stream of work on that we've been doing the last 4 years.
Wonderful. Well, really exciting to hear the plastic swap app as well. I hope we can get more councils and general citizens to be involved with that. And Alice, I know you had some points to share there.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think that what it comes down to is that extended producer responsibility. It definitely needs to be the people making it have to take it back. But I think at an individual level, if people are feeling overwhelmed, like you go to get a coffee and it's like, well, it says this cup is compostable, so maybe it's okay. It can be really hard to navigate that. So I think the app's a brilliant idea. And I think just to quickly break it down, generally biodegradable, as you mentioned, just means it fragments. It doesn't mean it goes away. It just means it can break down in nature. Compostable, maybe slightly better. It can break down in a compost, but even so, a lot of compostable plastics have to be an industrial composting system, which most places in Australia don't have. There are some that are backyard compostable. And as a general consumer, if those are your options, that's what you want to be going for. But it is a fairly new field, and there's a lot of businesses doing amazing things. There's also a lot of businesses kind of taking advantage and greenwashing with what they're putting out. So it is a really, really hard field to navigate. But generally, something that composts in your backyard is the best. Industrial compost, not so great, because it's very unlikely that with our waste stream, it's going to end up in an industrial compost. So it kind of ends up having the same issue. And then one big problem with bioplastics that I think really adds to the confusion is where to put it. So I think a lot of people get those bioplastics and they think, can I chuck it in my recycling? Can I put it in which bin does it go in? And so I think that often the UN did a big study that showed that bioplastics may actually make the problem worse, because people think they can throw them away, or it pollutes the recycling stream. So I think it's definitely an area that I'm hopeful will in the future be one of the big solutions, because we need to have alternatives for things that already exist, as you say, with the international supply chain. But I think it's really important to be discerning. And as a consumer, that can be really hard, which is why, again, we need those better legislations, better business responsibility to step up and make it easier for the consumer.
And if I can again jump in and just add something on that, about everybody doing something different, and the choices out there when you do go, en masse, when you do go shopping, it's still kind of confusing and limiting for people. And one of the things that we've done just as our own team, and what we share out with everybody that comes into connection and contact with us, is we say, instead of buying toothpaste, make your own toothpaste. It's actually so easy. It's really cost effective. It does even a better job than buying the tube of toothpaste. And toothpaste tubes are very, very, very difficult to be recycled. They cannot be put in curbside. They're looking at ways now of doing it, but it has to be specially put into a separate area, like the red cycle with soft plastics. So there are lots of things out there that people can do, but we've got to make it easy for them and say, you don't have to buy cheese wrapped in plastic in the supermarket. You can make your own cheese. You can make your own toothpaste. You can do a lot of things that are really easy. And I think because even though COVID's been, we call it in our workplace, we call it the plastic pandemic and everything, we could talk about being in a grey zone, there are some good things that are coming out of this where people have got time to think about. It's not just about the planet health. We're thinking about human health, but what is happening with the planet, and lots of alternatives. And I think with the initiatives that are out there, we're finding that we just offer a lot more options. The kids are coming up with great things. Our schools program, what the kids are putting forward at one school that's successful, we're sharing with other schools and getting clusters of schools coming together. And the kids are really taking the lead and taking that up the line to the councils and taking it up the line to the businesses. We've got some really amazing ambassador students that are going and writing to some of the big volume food companies like meat pies and those sort of ones and saying, we don't want you to bring meat pies wrapped in plastic to our school canteen. We don't want them that way. If you want to give them us those pies, package them in a way that they are not wrapped in plastic. So kids are really making change. They're doing a lot of work behind the scenes, which is really fantastic. But I understand, and you know, Barney, back over to you, because I kind of jumped in there because I get excited about all the things we want to share.
No. This is what we're here for. The excitement is very appreciated, and yeah, I think just keeping the whole conversation really positive is important, because it can be overwhelming to see some of the data, especially with PrEP, and the you know, the projections till 2050 look pretty grim until we start going down. But having these sort of conversations and being able to disrupt, especially councils and sector by sector, you know, like aviation and hospitals and schools, you know, we can get sector by sector creating really good blueprints that can be scaled. Then hopefully the subsidies to make the slightly expensive plastic-free alternatives a reality, whether it's infrastructure or material costs compared to hydrocarbon virgin. You know, hopefully if we can build out these institutional blueprints, it will kind of go over to the manufacturing as well. So there's so many ways we can kind of leapfrog and not rely on federal or state, and kind of go more regional and more kind of yeah, I think that's a big part of it as well. And yeah, I mean, how do any of you have any advice on how to kind of not focus on the bigger picture? Because, you know, thinking about 10+ million and increasing every year hitting our oceans, and only like, I think, what was it, something like 60-70% of that's out of only 8 rivers globally. Like, how can we keep hopeful with facts like that and be like, all right, well, let's go and address the 8 big polluting rivers, and not just feel overwhelmed by the extent of it? But how, any advice on how to both engage young people, and I'm sure Gavin, you have some thoughts on this, but just to kind of keep that hope going whilst driving forward, like this is something we can't remain asleep about, and we do need to have individual responsibility, but let's keep hopeful about it instead of being down in the dumps about it.
Yeah, so I think going on part of the education program, it is really about sort of making small steps on what each person can take, as opposed to, oh my God, look at this problem. Because like, as the old saying goes, you can't eat an elephant with one single bite. You have to break it up into small chunks and then try to sort out each problem individually. So I think it really comes down to what the individual can take right now, because like, as I guess in the countries such as Australia, when we're relatively developed and we have a variety of different options, it really is about knowing which options we can choose that can bring the most amount of results. And then in the meantime, also for example, if you're, I guess one small tip is if you're doing, say, 3D printing, use PLA plastic. Don't use ABS, because ABS comes from petroleum products, but rather if you use PLA plastic, it is actually slightly more environmentally friendly. It's about these small changes that you can implement that doesn't really like sort of impact your lifestyle. So rather than looking at a statistics that say, oh my God, we're producing like, insert this number here, billion tons of plastics per year. So rather than being shocked at that number, it is about, okay, if I do this, but if everyone implements something similar to what I have just implemented, then that's going to reduce that number by, say, even 5% is still significant on a global scale. So in a sense, and then if we have industries, for example, different transportation companies moving from fossil fuel powered buses to electric buses that are powered by solar energy in countries such as Norway, in countries such as even China. For that single move alone, we're going to slash our emissions levels by a significant margin if those buses are powered by solar energy. So in a sense, it is about making small yet still measurable steps towards a set goal that is easily achievable, but also ambitious towards the future. So in a sense, if we're going to implement that as a systematic measure, then that is how we can avoid being statistic shocked in a sense. That sort of makes sense.
Wonderful, and thanks for that, Gavin. The statistics shock's never fun. I think we are feeling a kind of catch up on a lot of statistics from the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60+ years of understanding a lot of these problems. especially those who've been at it for decades, I think they just sometimes want to rattle some of the people and be like, yo, dude, we're telling you this 3 decades ago, like, why are you now catching up? And maybe I'd love to hear just some impact points from Plastic Oceans Australasia, like maybe just some things from the past couple of years, or how many beaches cleaned up, or kids engaged, kind of any impact summary from all of your amazing work would be really lovely to share and discuss.
Okay, I guess that'll be me. So we don't do beach cleanups. We leave the experts in the other NGOs and other areas to do that, because we really focus in delivering actually in the schools themselves and into the businesses. So, and the kids go out and do all sorts of excursions and incursions, etc. So we feel that the beach cleanups are really important, but for us, that's the last frontier. It's already sort of got there. We're trying to stop it at the source. So we delivered to nearly 6,000 students in 2019-20. Our program, it's in Australia, New Zealand, and we've just started delivering it in Indonesia. Of course, we've had a bit of a stop-start because of COVID, because obviously schools haven't even been open. Everyone's been at home. So we've had a little bit of a, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back kind of approach, but we've really got some big runs on the board at the moment, and we're delivering through a lot of councils in various states around Australia, which has been really fantastic. And those groupings of those school students are now becoming school collectives, where they're, as I said before, we're getting the clusters where they're sort of making the power of change, and actually going to those school students are going to other schools and mentoring them. So they don't even need us anymore. They're the leaders. So it's all about leadership and generational change. Everything we do is thinking about the generations and how they can actually be the leaders. So we go in, we spend a lot of time doing facilitation in the first year and actually walk them through the whole journey so that they can be successful. We want them to be really successful, and then they can carry on that journey. So that's with our schools program, that's just gathering momentum nationally, because it's the only program that offers a 12-month structured program where lots of things like what you're doing, Alice, would be wonderful for the kids to take advantage of when they, if it's in the area, and, that's all really great. We're doing community events like picnics and all sorts of other activities. Our success, I guess, impacts are also the fact that we really are working as a circular economy with the type of business. So we are going to councils, getting councils to work with us to go to the schools, and getting the schools to go to the businesses. So we've got this closed loop, and we're getting the councils to walk the talk themselves. So they're taking up our program that we do for little people, and we call it the program for big people, which is EPIC. And they are actually taking on that program. So while the kids are doing the schools program, the council staff are actually doing it themselves. And that's really been really powerful. And then we've also now starting to go to retail stores as well. So they're all doing it, and they're all singing the same tune. And that's, I believe, one of the ways to make really positive, impactful change. If everyone just does it, many years ago, when everybody smoked, like everybody seemed to be smoking, it was so not cool to not be a smoker. You're really the fish out of water, so to speak. And then, of course, how it's all changed. Like if anyone sees anybody smoking, like now it's like, oh, why do you smoke? Like, what would you be doing that for? It's kind of like that sort of approach. And it's all about that behavior change. And it actually takes up to 255 days to change your plastic habit behavior, as opposed to, how they say it takes 3 weeks to, change a habit if you're going to like stop drinking or, change to another toothpaste. I keep talking about toothpaste or whatever it might be, or, go on a diet or whatever it is. But plastic is actually so difficult to change. And most of the people in our, the last 50 years, because plastic's been around since 1907, but really been commercialised and in our lives for a long time, it's just, people just don't know how to not live with it. So that's why we really work very hard on this generational change and the program. So our impact is really through education, science. Everything we do is with our scientific team here in Australia as well as overseas. So we have a global alliance, and we get a lot of data from the UK with Plastic Oceans UK as well. And they've actually now pivoted over to Ocean Generation. So there's some really big things going on for us as we keep spreading our word out there to get it happening. And it's only about mass. Got to get it out there on mass.
And thank you so much for sharing that. I really like that you're going to Indonesia, because they are definitely one of the bigger polluters, especially around Jakarta. And so maybe just to build on that, you know, any, and maybe Alice, you could touch, or anyone, just the kind of the key performance indicators within the circles that you're making happen. So whether you're approaching a small business or one of the 6,000 students, or approaching a council, what kind of actionable rallying points are you getting within that kind of circularity? Are you getting them to make commitments to go zero plastic? And I know Gavin mentioned the plastic audits to kind of understand the data, but I'm just curious with that kind of activation side, like how are you managing, you know, capturing the impact data, and like what you're kind of looking for in tracking the businesses or the students or the councils? Like what are you kind of watching, and is it tracking?
How we measure it, the measurable outcomes?
Yeah, just how you're kind of tracking, like for a council, I'm guessing you kind of do the audit, you get them to understand it, and then maybe is it the reduction that you're tracking, or anything on that would be awesome.
So it's absolutely, so it's two things. It's really very simple. We make it as easy as possible. We do surveys, audits at the beginning, then we do survey audits at the end of the 12 months. So it's really measurable, transparent. They can physically see the difference of what they've reduced. We don't actually say we want you to go zero, because it's a big ask and it's scary. We say we want you to reduce as much as you possibly can. And if we can get your footprint down from, if it was 90% to 50%, yay, that is so fantastic. And then we keep working on the journey. It takes a long time for them to actually reduce what they're using and transition over to new products. And councils in particular, they have tenders, they have products they've bought for 3 years sitting in the storeroom that they can't just get rid of. They've got to work through all of that. So we measure everything. There's reports every 3 months, and it's very analytical, and we work through with them, and we talk about what they've achieved, what were their challenges, and then we talk about the whole behaviour change model. So it's very in depth, and we've made it structured so that it's easy for them. So it's 4 stages over 12 months, and it makes it really easy for them to see what their impactful change is. And the same for the schools. But the schools, we let them do it themselves, because they're little people and they're smarter in a lot of ways than the big people, and they get it really fast and they do it. So they create the surveys, they do the audits, and they are just all over it. They're amazing. So we use the data from what they've done in their 12 months, and we also use that to share with other schools. So it's been really, really exciting to see that. So it's not, we try and keep, the KISS methodology, keep it simple, stupid. We can't just keep it really simple so people can get on board and not get scared by it. We want them to enjoy the journey. And I know it sounds a bit, corny, but if you, like you said before, we're all sick of the doom and gloom numbers, like I said, about 129 face masks, and all of that, billion face masks. But I think we need a bit of a balance. You've got to balance it. What can you do? And don't beat yourself up about it. If you can't or do the right thing, you'll get there eventually. But eventually has to happen really quickly, because we are so far behind. And that's why we're drowning in plastic, particularly in Indonesia. It's terrible. It's one of the worst countries in the world with plastic.
It really is, and it's definitely a concern. And maybe just to wrap up the plastics panel today, maybe we could all just give our thought that's a bit out of the box. So instead of just bring your bottle, bring your shopping bag, engage your council. I think some of those are fairly obvious, but any kind of out of field advice for anyone tuning in on how to address being a little bit more conscious about your plastic, and hopefully one day free, but kind of just to encourage that transition to anyone listening who's managing a business or a student, or who is locally within the Dandenong Council. So whoever would like to start, maybe Gavin, you could.
Small point. So I think recently there's been a lot of hate on single-use plastic bottles, like the $1, $2 ones you get, but actually they can sometimes be even better than reusable ones. That is, if you buy like a $1 plastic bottle from like your local petrol station, you pretend that bottle is a reusable bottle. So if you can manage to reuse that bottle for like 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, because the amount of plastics that go into a single-use bottle is so much less than that of a reusable bottle, if you can reuse a single-use bottle for a significant amount of time, then it can actually be more friendly to our environment than if you used a reusable bottle for the same period of time. So I think that's sort of one of the tips I've been going along for the past while.
Thanks for that.
I can just weigh in a little bit there. I definitely see where you're coming from, but I think it's worth mentioning that probably that's terrible for your health because the chemicals that leach out of those single-use plastic bottles are just awful. So, so I definitely understand your point. It's definitely better sometimes to just try and get the most life out of whatever you buy, but also just please don't drink out of that plastic bottles.
Sometimes it is out of desperation.
Especially
it's tricky in this world where
right?
all the bubblers are taped over from COVID.
Especially in the sun, right, Alice? The sunlight really activates the chemical leaching and everything.
Yeah, generally any plastic that's squishy like that is only squishy like that because of a whole lot of different plasticizers and a whole bunch of different chemicals that they've put in there, which leach very easily, particularly when heated. So it's another good reason to like take your own container for takeaway food and things like that, because heat and any of that softer plastic, terrible, horrendous health impacts that I don't have time to get into right now, but I'm happy to get into later. And then I might turn that around into a more positive ending. So you asked for something maybe out of the box. There's kind of two very different ones I wanted to, or kind of the same. So basically what I would like to encourage everyone to do is just use their own skills. So I think at the end of the day, it's maybe not about choosing one item. And I think we know that, but I think people often don't realize how much power they have. And they think, well, I didn't study marine science, or I'm not a chemical engineer, and so I don't have that much to offer in this space. And I think that ultimately everyone has something amazing to offer. It's just a matter of finding where you can put that energy and put those skills that you have. So maybe you're an incredible communicator and you start a discussion group, or maybe you are an incredible marketing guru and you team up with amazing plastic-free products to get their message out. Maybe everyone has epic skills to offer. So it's about finding what things you're good at and then using those to make a difference. And one little example is I have a friend who is quite good at marketing and advertising. That's his background. And so he saw an opportunity he's created this new thing where basically you buy a reusable bottle, but all the money from those reusable bottles is going to families in Indonesia. It pays people to clean up the rivers in Indonesia full time. The plastic that's collected all goes to the plastic bank, and the plastic bank melts it down and makes water purifiers, which then go into the villages in Indonesia so that the people don't have to use plastic bottles, so that they can get fresh water within their village. And for me, that's a perfect little model where it kind of comes in at every level. So it gives people an alternative to single-use plastics, but it also hits at the source of that problem. It tackles it in one of the places it most needs tackling. So that brand's called Ripple, if you want to check it out, but there's lots of other amazing initiatives out there. So yeah, my little takeaway would be use what skills you have and just think outside the box. Yeah, projects like that really can make a huge difference on so many levels.
Really love that cycle, especially with the filtrating the water, because it is quite easy for us to say don't use single use here, but you know, you're in some countries if you go anywhere near tap water. So really love that.
I always take my Sperry pen.
Yeah, the live. I haven't heard of that one. I've got the live straw little bottle.
Yeah, that's
which
great
says
too.
Personal filtration options. And I really liked building on your strengths. Like you've got probably a friend who likes making bread, and then another one who likes making soap, and then another one who does this. And being able to have your community both like support to avoid having to go to Woolworths. And if you live remotely, you know, being able to be a hub for whatever you order 5 gallons of laundry detergent for your community of 100 people, and then they have a laundry detergent for a whole year, you know, instead of having to buy however many laundry detergent boxes they are.
Or you can make it.
Indeed, or buy in bulk or make in bulk, or you know, just rurally it can be tough. You know, I live out off grid where I'm at, and the nearest shopping centres are just under an hour away, so it's not like I can. You have to think a bit more, and I think it's just rurally helping people with this stuff is important. And Ricki, maybe you share your one solution that's slightly out of the box.
Well, I think Alice sort of said what I was, the path I was going to go down. I think we think very similar, obviously, with what we're doing, having been around the traps for a while. I think out of the box is that people know that what they do does make a difference, and that hope, and it's an extension of what Alice has said, is that we need lots and lots of people, like the example of what you've given, Alice, with your friend. We need lots and lots of people that want to actually do that. And there's lots of new startups, there's lots of businesses out there that have really, looked at being in lockdown around the world as an initiative to do something differently. And I think if we can get it affordable, more durable, the plastic is being popular because it's very durable and very affordable and very flexible. And if we can get people to think about that and transfer that to alternative things, I would say that my out of the box is get people to really know that there is an opportunity there, and it can be seen as a commercial opportunity different to recycling. So the recycling businesses are making a lot of money on what they're doing, but it's still keeping that plastic going around in the system. And ultimately we don't want the plastic. So it's about the alternatives. So I'm really, really keen about people thinking out of the box of what they can do with alternative products that can really, really make a difference, and not using the resources, our natural resources, like we are. Because to make plastic, you need fresh water, you need lots of energy, and of course it's a byproduct of petroleum, and all things are, resources that we shouldn't be using. So that's me. I haven't really got a specific item. I was going to go to a smaller item, like the hair, the shampoo bottles, and saying, you could easily just switch to hair shampoo bars, the little bars, which totally takes that away. And I think have done a great job with doing all of that. There's lots of things like that, but I think it's about having the hope and knowing that what you're going to do is really going to make a difference. So if every day you just do one little tiny thing, it does actually matter. And that's the thing, it's people being positive.
Agreed. And maybe I'll add one more bit before Gavin. I'd love to hear one more kind of student solution from. I think another thing that I would definitely encourage, if you've got a brand that you like I like Vegemite, Vegemite still has the yellow top on it, and I want to at some point together and ring up Vegemite and be like, yo dude, you're a national icon, get your act together. Don't have a jar lid instead of a plastic lid. And if you do like brands, there's like a veggie chip brand that's Australian made and vegan and really yummy, and I like eating gluten-free, even though the Pringles option is plastic-free. So I'm going to write to the veggie chips homies and be like, come on guys, I like your salt and vinegar chips, but you're still using plastic instead of a cardboard or another alternative. So I think if you really like a brand, and I like veggie sausages as well, and there's a brand that I'd like to reach out and be like, come on guys, can you innovate and try and think about how you can deliver something that's either in cardboard or a substitute. So I would definitely not underestimate your impact as a consumer to reach out directly to people that you're using in your life and that you can push back. And Gavin, I'd love to hear maybe another solution.
Adding on to that, I'd just like to point out Richard's IGA. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but if you use their, if you get one of their reusable bags, they actually have something that's pretty horribly mixed up, because on there it says reuse, recycle, reduce in the hierarchy. So basically you reuse first, and then you recycle, and then you reduce. I think it's pretty interesting how they mess up the hierarchy, which is supposed to be reduce, reuse, recycle. But instead on their bags, they write reuse, recycle, and reduce, which is not really the right way of approaching it. So I'd really love to, even after this panel, just to ring up Richard's IG and be like, sorry guys, but that's not how you're supposed to address the environmental issues. I'm not sure if that shows up on camera. I've got a picture of it. Ooh, I'll turn off the virtual background. But yeah, it says reuse, recycle, and reduce rather than reduce, reuse, recycle. I think that might be subject to a bit of misunderstanding if the average consumer was going to see it. So it probably be a good idea to ring them up and say that's not how the correct order is done.
Agreed, and 100% on that, Gavin. And we need to tastefully reach out to people who might be projecting something wrong or greenwashing, because some people do want to do good, but they don't end up doing good. And I think at least people are trying is a good sign. It can be like I've done beach cleanups with the cornstarch bags instead of the plastic bags, now I only use Hessian sack bags because I've been ripped apart by all of my social justice friends. But like I was using the corn made bio bags, and then they were like, oh, you're still contributing to plastic and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, all right, Hessian bags it is. But I did feel like a bit of a fool, even though I was still out there cleaning up bag after bag after bag with these bio bags. But I don't know, I think being soft with people and transitioning is important. And Gavin, I'd love to hear with your work with students, you know, what's one thing you would encourage the council, for example? We are coming back to the Dandenong city, you know, if the council could enforce one thing in all of the schools in the Dandenong area, what would you get the council to do for all of the schools and the governance between those schools? What would be the one solution you'd want the council to kind of enforce from a policy standpoint?
It's a wonderful question. So I think if there is one thing that, in a sense of an external power, it will definitely be the recycling system inside schools. So what the issue right now sort of is, so from the various plastic audits we've conducted in various schools, is that students don't really know what to put into the recycling bins. Like, people are trying to recycle the proper stuff. Like, people are trying to recycle things that they believe can recycle, but often that's really a misconception. So for example, some people putting like Glad wrap into the recycling bin, the others put something that can be recycled into the landfill bin. So I think in terms of what the council can do is really sort of like education of the general population on what can be recycled, what really can't be recycled, what you can put into that. I'm not sure the color of the bins in the city of Dandenong, but here the recycling bins are yellow. So what can be put into your yellow bins, what can be put into your red bins, it really is about the education on what exactly goes into the recycling bin. I felt like that's sort of one point where both the students and the general public is sort of missing out a bit on.
Agreed. Making it fun. That's why I like the Sustainable Development Goals so much, because they've broken down 17 hugely big, massive global issues, like no poverty, number one. That's no joke, you know, but it's colorful and it's accessible. And, you know, I've got that outside our office for our charity up here in Mossman, and people just stop and look at it because it's like, what is this colorful thing? It looks like Kinder Block gardens, God, my brain, the kindy blocks. And yeah, just I think we've got to make it colorful and accessible to all people, and to not use too much big language. You know, I think I've learned that with talking about sustainability, that we can, even something like hydrocarbons or PFAS, or you can't assume people know what certain words mean, and especially when we're using kind of environmental words like sustainable development goals, you know, SDGs and ESG and CSR. I think it's important to make the language and the solutions we're talking about really accessible. And I think if you can make stuff accessible for students, generally everyone else can kind of get involved. So your work's cut out for you, Gavin, and we're definitely here to support with all your good work towards engaging students. And yeah, thank all three of you for just tuning in today and making an effort on the weekend. You know, there's lots of other things that we could be doing, but here we are sharing conversation, and you know, all of the content that we're generating from these discussions will definitely be used within the climate emergency strategy for the Dandenong Council. So, you know, we'll really appreciate just sharing your voice and sharing passion, and clearly a deep care for ecology and indeed the ocean. So yeah, really grateful for the conversation today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great, thanks. Can't think of anything else I'd rather be talking about on a weekend. Great to be having these conversations.
Especially in Melbourne, where we can't go out anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Barney. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure meeting you.
And
it's a pleasure meeting you as well, Alice.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, guys.
Awesome, team. Well, you can hang out for a sec. I think we're just wrapping up the today, which was waste and resources, and what a poignant discussion on really how to address that at source within the wonderful work of Plastic Oceans, inspiring businesses and students and everyone in between. And yeah, let's just take that moment to acknowledge both land and sea and the traditional owners, and us going through Reconciliation Week. This is day 3, and I know in Melbourne a lot of the events have been cancelled because of the realities of this little outbreak. But today has been a good day, and tomorrow it's the final theme. It's been a 9-day festival, So really covered a lot of topics, but tomorrow really is talking about the future, and where all of the themes, whether it's talking about good health and well-being, you know, assets and land development, preserving biodiversity and open space, transport and mobility, addressing waste and resources, you know, all of these themes, how can we kind of bundle everything up and really be creating more blueprints for the future, and working towards more of a sustainable shared future that supports our life systems instead of just takes, which I know all three of you really understand. And yeah, just thank you so much again for everyone who's tuned in, and good luck to all those in Melbourne, and I hope this lockdown ends swiftly so you can get back outside and enjoy fresh air. So big hugs from far north Queensland, and we'll be seeing kicking off tomorrow at, I think, I've forgotten the time. I think it's 9:30. I'm going to say 9:30. It could be 10 because it's Sunday, but I'm sure someone will put that in the chat in a second. But regardless, thank you again for the wonderful plastics panel, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks a lot.
See ya.